Dr. Kathy Rovito is a community health educator, a social health researcher, and faculty director of community health program here in Winter Park at Rollins College. Her work centers on the social drivers of health, especially how connection shapes the lives of boys and young men. She leads the Male Wellness Collective and is active in community change efforts across Central Florida, including the Peace and Justice Institute, the Florida Healthy Youth Alliance, and 100 Women Strong. Rooted in belief in our shared humanity, Kathy sees connection not just as a research focus, but as a guiding principle in her teaching, leadership, and life. So please join me in welcoming to the CFFC, Kathy.
Okay, so thank you for being here with me today and for sharing this space and time with me. So I'd also like to acknowledge the day, Father's Day. So I want to wish happy Father's Day to the fathers that are with us today, and specifically my husband who came to support me, even though we left our two little girls somewhere else today. So happy Father's Day. But I also want to briefly acknowledge the emotional complexity that sometimes comes with this day. And for many of us, today brings a lot of joy. And for others, it's a little bit complicated. But at its core, Father's Day is really about relationships and it's about belonging. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about the human thread known as connection. I am extremely excited to be talking about this because I try to practice this in my own life with my students, but also professionally. Most importantly, because we're social animals, and social connection is foundational and it's fundamental to our health and well-being. Yet we are facing a disconnection crisis today with loneliness and isolation. And in 2023, an advisory came out calling for a national strategy to essentially repair our social ties as communities. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on together. Collectively, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the Surgeon General's advisory that came out 2 years ago. We're going to talk about the science around connection. We'll also talk about what makes communities thrive. And hopefully, I will leave you with some practical strategies on what you can do individually, but also using your own power to collectively come together to do some good with social well-being in our communities. So 2 years ago, the U.S. Surgeon General at the time, so Dr. Vivek Murthy, issued a rare public health advisory. And it wasn't around a virus. It was around loneliness and social disconnection. And I have a quote here that represents the reason why Dr. Murphy decided to put this strategy out. One button for it. So I'm going to read it out. People began to tell me that they felt isolated, invisible, and insignificant, even when they couldn't put their finger on the word lonely, time and time again. People of all ages and socioeconomic backgrounds from every corner of the country would tell me, I have to shoulder all of life's burdens by myself, or if I disappear tomorrow, no one will even notice. It was a light bulb moment for me. Social disconnection was far more common than I had realized. So, a little bit about the advisory that was put out in 2023, just to highlight the significance of the moment and why this is a really big deal for the field as it relates to social connection. But a Surgeon General's advisory is a official public health statement that's issued by the U.S. Surgeon General who's sitting at the time. And it helps elevate public health priorities to spotlight critical health challenges that may not be receiving enough attention at the time. It also informs policymakers around evidence-based recommendations to help them make decisions around policy or money where they want to provide funding and resources. and it mobilizes stakeholders to really foster cross collaboration among sectors because these issues that these advisories are written around are multi sectoral. And we have to bring different industries and different areas of people working together to be able to make a change. And lastly, the advisory is important because it changes how we view it, changes the public perception, and it changes behavior as it relates to the national crisis. So this was really, really big for social connection. The advisory recognized social disconnection as a public health threat, bringing it to the table on par with that of smoking and obesity. So, how is disconnection a public health threat? When we talk about disconnection or the lack of social connection, we're typically speaking about loneliness, which is the perception of isolation or just being isolated. And I'll talk a little bit more about the difference between those two. But disconnection is as harmful, and you can see it on the left hand side, as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It is more harmful than excessive binge drinking and being physically inactive. It's also linked to an increased risk, and this ranges from 26% to 50% based on the condition that we're focusing on. But there's an increased risk for heart disease, for depression, for dementia, suicidality, and self harm. And it costs our employers, our businesses a lot of money, and it's tied through the loss of productivity and greater absenteeism. We also know at the community level, socially disconnected communities are more likely to see higher crime rates and lower economic stability. But the communities that have extremely um, tight social ties, they experience lower crime rates and greater civic engagement. So they see more people going out to vote and more people volunteering in those communities. So, who's most susceptible? When we look at the populations and communities who are most susceptible, focusing on age, we typically see a U shaped curve. So, our youngest and then our oldest. So, with older adults, they're most susceptible, and it's due to a variety of reasons, but it's been linked to health, retirement, the loss of loved ones, and limited mobility. Our young people, also specifically Generation Z, about 80% of them are reporting chronic loneliness today. And these are our young people, our kids are young people between the ages of 13 to 28. And it's been linked to, yes, social media, high use of social media, challenges in being able to develop really strong face to face social networks. And that period is a period of transition where they are very susceptible to the negative feelings due to peer exclusion and social anxiety. But there's also other communities that are susceptible to loneliness and isolation. We look at our marginalized communities, specifically the LGBTQ plus individuals, and this is due to social stigma, to discrimination and lack of support. And those of us who are living alone, our caregivers, our single parents, and that's especially true for our seniors and older adults, but it can impact any one of us. And it is probably impacting a lot of us who are in this space today. So, social connection involves the interactions, the relationships, the roles, and the sense of community that individuals, that communities together, in society at large that we may experience. And our level of connection, it's not just simply determined by the number of relationships or the number of people that we have close to us, but there's a lot of different ways that we can connect socially. And equally, there's a lot of different ways that we can lack social connection. So these typically fall under these three categories that you see up there. So the first is structure. This is the quantification of our relationships. So that's the number, the diversity in our roles. So if we're friends, family members, coworkers, neighbors, we are quantifying how many relationships we have. That's the structure. We look at the function, and that's how much support we perceive we're receiving from our relationships, but also the type of support that we are actually receiving through our relationships. And then quality focused on trust and emotional closeness. And this is how satisfying our relationships actually feel. And a few other things to keep in mind when we talk about social connection, it exists on a continuum. So, all of us, based on the chapter that we are in life, we're going to fall somewhere on that continuum. And it's dynamic. So, it changes over time. And what's most important is how long we actually stay at the end of those continuums. So, if we talk about the transient feeling of loneliness versus that chronic feeling of loneliness, it is that chronic experience that is the most detrimental. So, how does connection and disconnection affect our health? And so, this is an area where understanding the mechanisms of how this ultimately affects different health outcomes, whether it increases or reduces different health outcomes, we're still learning. There's still a lot of research that's being conducted in this area. But we've been able to identify three specific ways today on how this affects our health. So there's several reviews that document social connections influence through our biological pathways and specifically through the regulation of our cardiovascular systems and our endocrine systems. It affects our immunity and it also affects our gut microbiome interaction. So, strong research demonstrates that being isolated, so it could be objectively or perceptually. So, we may think we're not connected to people, or we may physically not be connected to people. It can increase inflammation in our body to the same degree as being physically inactive. And the idea is that social connection improves our health following something similar. So it helps regulate the dysregulation that we experience through social disconnection. Social connection can also influence our health through psychological processes, such as a sense of meaning and purpose. So many of us, I wouldn't think that we rate our relationships, specifically those with our family and our close friends, as the most important source of meaning. Or if you're a parent, your children might be a really important source of meaning, purpose, and motivation in your life. We also know that a sense of meaning positively contributes to different health outcomes because it motivates us to have greater self regulation when it comes to different goals, specifically our health goals. And finally, the third pathway mechanism, if you want to call it that, social connection influences us is through our behaviors, specifically through social influence. It can be direct. You can have your loved one. You might be a parent and you have kids, and you're telling them that they have to go to bed at a certain time. You're encouraging them to get more sleep. Or reminding someone to take their medication. My husband every morning gives me my thyroid medication in the morning when he makes his coffee. So that is a wonderful thing that he's taken off of me, so I don't have to remind myself. But there's that social influence to allow me to be able to adhere to certain treatments. But the influence can also be subtle and it can be indirect through the social norms that we build, the social norms that we continue to foster. And those social norms can communicate approval or disapproval of certain behaviors. So I want us to zoom out just a little bit, and want us to now look at social connection through the lens of a system. So connection isn't just individual, it is systemic. And what leads us to be more or less socially connected is really found in our environment. And there's a wide variety of factors that can influence our connection individually, but also our connection in our communities. In our field in public health, we use an organizing tool that's called the social ecological model, which is what you're seeing up here on the screen. And this model organizes these factors, so these influencers, it was showing the interconnectedness of each level of those factors that are affecting our health. So if you look at the individual level factors, this is what we come with. So our past history, our genetic predispositions, our age, knowledge, skills, attitudes around certain things. You look up at the next level, our relationships, those are the people that we're around. So our peers, our coworkers, our social network, they all influence our health. Then we have our community, and that's the built and the physical environment, our access to schools. And then finally, the society level influences. And these are our norms, the policies or lack thereof, and the health inequities that we've experienced in the past. So each one of these levels, they contribute to our social connection and its associated risks and protection for health. So it's not just about who we connect with. So that advisory that the Surgeon General put out in 2023, it's not telling us to pick up the phone and call a friend. That is one aspect of it. But it's really saying that it's about our systems, and we have to change our systems that are either making it really easy for us, facilitating our connection, or making it more difficult for us to connect. So the advisory gives us a strategy, and it outlines 6 specific pillars to guide us as individuals, stakeholders, to strengthen the social connection in our communities. And as we go through these 6 pillars, I encourage each one of you to think about your role in your community, what you're affiliated with, whether you're a business owner or you have a family of your own. Think about those roles and think about how you're able to participate in these 6 pillars. So, our first pillar has to do with our social infrastructure. There are a lot of different things that influence social connection, and they are predominantly environmentally based. So, this involves the decisions that we make about the layout of our cities and our towns. So, the usability of our public transportation systems, for example, or how we design housing, how we design our green spaces. All of that has a direct effect on our social interaction in the community. So when we talk about social infrastructure, that involves the programs, it involves our policies and our community and public spaces. So libraries and the playgrounds and the parks that we have access to. And when we focus on this pillar, we also want to focus about those communities that are most susceptible, most at risk. So, equitable access for all groups is extremely foundational to being able to work around this pillar. The second pillar that the advisory highlights has to do with pro connection policies. So, we all know that government at all levels, they play a critical role in strengthening our communities in connection across all different sectors. And policymakers, they understand that while the effects of social connection may be directly tied to health, the actual drivers, the contributors to social connection are found in all types of policies. And so when we talk about enforcing or practicing a connection in all policies approach, we're recognizing that every sector in society is relevant to social connection and that the policies within each sector, whether it's the technology sector, the business sector, the education sector, each each sector, their policies are playing a role in potentially hindering or facilitating connection. So, some examples of what these policies might look like, something to promote work life integration, something to promote social participation, or maybe you run a business and you're considering should I move from 5 days a week to 4 days a week, or allowing a sabbatical every so many months for your employees to go out and to connect with the community and what's offered locally. The third pillar is focused on our healthcare and medical sector. And so here we want to treat social connection like a health priority. We want to screen for it and we want to refer for it. Has anyone been to the doctor recently and they ask you if you have a support system at home or you have someone at home that you can rely on? That's this. That's this in practice. So it's critical that we invest in education and training of our doctors and other healthcare providers to really get them understanding the role that social connection has in our outcome in our health outcomes, but also putting things in place to be able to get that information and to have those conversations. And this can be accomplished by within the medical system, but we can also be connecting providers and patients to community based organizations in our neighborhoods. And an example of this in practice, which has not been picked up here in the US yet, but Canada has been doing, making some really great movements, is this idea of social prescribing. So we know that our healthcare providers, they prescribe medications, but with social prescribing, doctors can refer patients to community activities, to different social services. So they'll screen first using a standardized screening tool for loneliness, and they will prescribe you to go and attend the Central Florida Freethought Community Social Event, for example. So the fourth pillar that the advisory highlights has to do with technology in our digital environments. And so for this pillar, it's being able to decide specifically how technology is designed and how we use it, but more importantly, learning how data transparency, when we require data transparency from technology companies, how that can really help us understand the current and long term effects on social connection and implementing and enforcing safety standards. So we want to be able to use technology because we know it's not going to go away, but we want to fit to foster connection and not replace connection. And we also want to be intentional that wherever we use this, which is everywhere, we make sure that these face to face moments like what we're having today are also incorporated equally, or if not more, into our services. The fifth pillar from the advisory is deepening our knowledge on social connection. And so the advisory, they help outline a summary of the evidence on how social connection and disconnection, how it impacts individuals and communities. The totality of that evidence currently illustrates that this is a problem and we need to be paying attention to it, but there's still a lot of gaps that exist. So we need to expand research, funding, collecting data, but specifically more understanding what this looks like at the local level. There is a lot of information at the national and global level what social connection looks like, but it is lacking locally. What does social connection look like in the Winter Park community? What does it look like in the Eatonville community? Because we all have different needs. We have access to different conditions and access to different services. So this deepening of knowledge is expanding that understanding. It is also focus on helping expand the awareness around this issue when it comes to just us, everyday people, and raising awareness with the public and getting them to understand why this is so important to our health individually, but also collectively as a society. And the last pillar from this advisory is culture, because we know that culture is power. It's our shared beliefs, it's our shared values that drive our behaviors individually and collectively. And ultimately, those behaviors are going to determine and shape programs and the policies that we have access to. So when we cultivate a culture of connection, this culture is going to rest on the core values kindness, of respect, of service, and commitment to one another, which exists here. I walked in and everyone was so kind to me, and I feel it. And you already have a culture here in this space with this community of connection. Now we just need to take that and translate that out and serve as messengers to be able to foster that culture elsewhere. So this involves normalizing social connection as a public health priority, normalizing conversations around this, normalizing the understanding of what is driving disconnection and how it affects our health. So we've explored why connection matters. Now we're going to take a look at the invisible glue that lets our communities thrive. And this is called social capital. Social capital, these are the benefits that we get, the benefits derived from our relationships and from our connections. And this involves the information, any help, any assistance, or collective influence that is really embedded in our connections. And we know, just like what we had reviewed previously, communities with high social capital, they experience lower mortality, there's lower crime rates, they're quicker with disaster recovery, which is really important because we just started hurricane season. And there is a stronger civic engagement in those communities. So there are three types of social capital. And we're going to first start off with the most intimate, so our bonding capital. These are our strong ties within a group. These are our close knit relationships with people that are just like us. So these are our best friends, family, affinity circles. Some of you may actually call this community here as part of your bonding capital. The second type of social capital is our bridging relationships, and these are ties between different groups. So, our relationships that cross social divides, these may be your neighbors, maybe you're a part of a club, hobbies, inner interest collaborations. Those are bridging capital. Then we have our final social capital, linking relationships. And these are relationships across different levels of power and status. So these are verticals ties to institutions and different power holders. So if you think about donors, funders, or executives in different companies, journalists, the commissioner, those would be part of the thinking capital. So, how do we build our social capital? How do we build those three different types of capital? There are three foundational building blocks. We all know of trust, the importance of trust. And this is the belief others are going to act fairly and keep the commitments that they say, because when we trust each other, we're more likely to engage in cooperative behaviors. We're more likely to share our resources and to provide support. There's also reciprocity. So, this is the I've got your back norm, a give and take, and it makes the help returnable and it reinforces trust. So, reciprocity reinforces trust by creating a sense of obligation and mutual benefit. And finally, we have our shared norms and our values. And this is that common ground that streamlines cooperation between people, between groups, and between communities. So I'd like for us to take a moment. We're going to reflect a little bit on our own social capital. And so if you're wanting to put this in practice, I encourage you to take out your phone. You can open up your notes app if you'd like, and jot down what comes to mind when we go through this reflection. And it can serve as a starting point for you to rekindle some of the connections that come up for you. But you can also just join me by just imagining what this might look like for you. So let's first start off by looking at your innermost circle. So your bonding capital. So who are the 2 to 3 people that you'd call at 3 o'clock in the morning? someone that you know you could call in a moment's time outside of normal working hours. Think about that person and notice how it feels when you think about that name and that individual. Does it bring a sense of security? Maybe you're a little bit uncomfortable. Does it bring a sense of maybe obligation? Because you're like, yes, I called that person and now I feel like I need to be there for them too. So now let's move on to your bridging capital. So this is your middle circle, your middle level. And I want you to picture, think about, visualize 2 to 3 acquaintances. And they may be individuals here sharing this space with you that are different from you in age, they're different in worldview, different in background and culture, ethnicities. And I want you to ask yourself, when was the last time you nurtured that tie? Mhm. And what comes up for you when you think about those individuals? Maybe it's a sense of gratitude that they are in your network. Maybe it's a sense of guilt because you're like, oh, God, she sent me a text like a week ago and I haven't responded back. Or they sent you an email and you haven't responded back. Maybe you're surprised by the names that actually pop up when you think about the Virgin Capital. And then finally, I want you to think about your outermost circle. So your linking capital. So think about someone, a contact who has access to resources and influence. And it may not benefit you. Do they know your name well that if you were to reach out to them, they'd know who you are? So, which of these layers, which of these circles are crowded? Maybe none. Which are near empty? Which did you have a really hard time of thinking of people? And what does that mean for you, for your goals, your own goals personally, what you hope to still achieve in life, maybe professionally, and also as a community here, the Central Florida Freethought community, the collective power with everyone who's in here? How do you think that plays a role here? So I encourage you to develop a micro commitment. And I'd like for you to choose one of those ties, whether it's your bonding, your bridging, or a linking tie. And I want you to work on strengthening that relationship, that connection over the next 30 days. So we can think about those bonding, that innermost circle, it keeps all of us grounded. The bridging, that's the middle circle, that's going to really help us with reach. It broadens our horizons. And then the linking amplifies our voice. Those linking relationships amplify what we actually do in our actions. So, a concrete set, once you're thinking about that person, send them a text, send them an email, send them a thank you, reach out to them. So, some other things that you can do at the individual level are listed up there, but you can host or you can attend a meetup, which I know happens all the time here, which is fabulous. A book club. So prioritize connection, whatever that might look like for you, because that's going to look different based on who's in your circle, who's not in your circle, what you have access to. But practice tiny kindness, so smiling, the compliments, like, oh, I love your dress, love your shoes. Those tiny kindness go really, really far. Practice deep listening, so engage fully in the conversations that you're in, which is a practice that I try to do every single day with our 2 little girls, is being fully present in the moment when they are with me, in front of me, Even though my mind's like, hey, Kathy, let's go over here. You have work, you have grades you need to be grading, you have a student you have to get back to. Being very intentional, being present in that moment with them. And audit your digital habits. So maybe take an evening where you just kind of unplug. So for the next 2 to 3 hours, take your phone, I don't know, lock it up in your car and don't go to it. And use that time to be able to connect with people that are around you. And remember, connection, being able to foster connection, it's not just an individual thing, it's systemic. So we also have some macro strategies that we can be focusing on, because each one of us as individuals, we all have some level of power to be able to get something started. So for some macro strategies, you can partner with local libraries for community forums. You can advocate for green spaces, really understand what the different communities they look like, what they have, what they don't have around you, the different neighborhoods. Explore what's called those third place collaborations. So these are locations outside of your home or people's work environments where they can gather, they can socialize, and they can build community. This could be the cafe, it could be the pub, it could be an outdoor park. And if you're maybe hosting candidate forums or community forums, bring people together and have conversations around how will policies help build connection? How will adding certain services or changing parts of our environment actually foster connection? And you can create a connection champion role in these organizations that you're affiliated with. And this person can volunteer to greet the new attendees, to invite them to socials, to check in with them. Different ways you can check in with them, but at least it's being intentional, having someone there who has that specific role. So, as we come to the end of our social connection journey, I do want to end with this quote here. So, there are two basic human yearnings: to feel at home and in one's own skin, and to feel at home on this wonderful earth. To only connect with your own ego is to be in a very lonely place. Our sense of self is a communal construct, whether you put it theologically or biologically. We are created for community. So, loneliness is not a personal failure, it is a system failure. But connection, that's something that we can choose. That's something that we need to, as a society, as a nation, we need to continue choosing that. And we can do so together. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here. I really hope that we all actively work on connecting with one another. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to ask you how much of the current loneliness problem was actually caused by the effects of COVID and the rise of the uh, the computers and cell phones being everybody's connection.
So, um, So COVID exacerbated the disconnection crisis. It existed before, but I think it really just brought to life. We started conversing way more about it. And COVID provided a shared experience for all of us. So there's a really great book called Bowling Alone by David Putman, and it talks about how the decline in social impact or social capital has been happening over the last 10 to 20 years. And so when we talk about also the second part of your question with social media and the internet, we're seeing the impact. So it is exacerbating the issue amongst our most youngest community.
The training that we get in etiquette and manners, he seems to have gotten a lot less rural generation to generation. And I was wondering what they have might have as an effect on the social interactions. That was the training that we all got in how to interact social. You mentioned things like looking people in the eye and smiling. because there are things that a lot of us were taught as children that I'm not sure new generations are still get behind that.
So I don't know what if you want to call it the educational landscape looks like around that, but I do know, and I speak from what we're doing with our own kids, and I can also speak to what we're seeing in the classroom in higher education, and we're not seeing that. And I think it really takes an intentional effort for when it comes to modeling, for adults to be able to do that. And I think, and just speaking from my experience, life is really busy. And there's so many inputs. And, I work full time, my husband works full time, and we're highly involved in our community. And we have our two kids, and I thankfully have a village with me helping raise them too. But it does take intentionality to be able to say, hey, Ava, say thank you, please, for smile. And so the more we pay attention to that, I think the more it's going to come out naturally. But I don't have data or any type of evidence around this, but I think life has gotten extremely busy for a lot of parents and a lot of families, and we're just not putting a lot of attention onto that.
I saw something very provocative recently, and I'd be curious to know if you think there's something to this theory. I was reading something that explained that if you go back to like my grandparents' generation, the 1940s, 1950s, that period, unions were a much stronger institution in American society. I'm sure promoting unions is not something the government is necessarily doing, but have you ever heard about that as a theory for why our society is so much more detached from each other than?
Oh my gosh, yes. So that's actually a really important trend. Again, going back to David Putman's book, Bowling Alone, he talks about the trends over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and the decline in unions is actually part of what we're seeing today. Yeah. Bowling Alone, yes.
So a lot of your points resonated with me, from social media to, I can say a lot about that, and the way that they're kind of taking our pain and selling it to corporations who then cure it. But one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently is infrastructure, and how kind of insurmountable it feels right now, because we've designed this infrastructure for one thing, right? It's very separate. It's very car heavy. It's very car reliant, and how it feels like there's an aversion to creating connected communities. And how do we step back from that way of thinking to allow ourselves to open the possibility of creating this infrastructure that can connect us?
So I think the simplest answer to that is having conversations, having conversations around this. I also think that there's a lack of awareness of how significant disconnection is when it comes to our health and well-being, and not just individually, but collectively as a society. And I think the more that we can serve as messengers, and even just doing our part individually at an aggregate, that's going to start coming together and making those changes. But I agree, it's hard once, money plays a lot, interest plays a lot here, and we just have to keep going out there and having our voices heard and fostering our own social capital. I would actually encourage you to identify those linking, bridging, and bonding ties, and see how you can foster those to then be able to utilize that to your own benefit for the work that you're trying to do.
Today, we have a lot more division, within society, right? Probably more than ever. And I mean, yesterday was prime example, right? We had the celebration of oneself versus No King's Day, right? So that was like a mega division there. And how can we work together to try to bridge that gap? I mean, to me, that's driving families apart, it's driving communities apart. You don't live in the same places anymore because, you know, I played Dungeons and Dragons, for example, and there was a friend of mine that I played with since high school, right? So I guess I'm one of the original nerds on that, or geeks, or whatever you want to call us. But what's happened is we continue to get together on a distance for a long time, and with a group of friends, and now we were going to meet to get together, you know, our annual get together, and actually meet face to face. And people don't want to meet when these other people are there now, and it's really a lot because of this social fracture that's happening out there. So how do we repair that, and how do we move towards getting things back together?
I like these loaded questions. So I don't have a solution to that, but I do, when you were sharing that, the first thing that came to mind, and I think a lot of you, if not most of you, are familiar with the Peace and Justice Institute, and they are a nonprofit, and they have the principles for how we treat each other. And so there are practices on how to go about being able to kind of hold space and converse with individuals. But I think it's also kind of putting ourselves and even bringing someone with us into these settings and these environments. And the Peace and Justice Institute, they're hosting an event, I believe it's actually Tuesday evening, that is around being able to have conversations where it's like really founded on just differences. Being in those spaces and around people with different opinions and different worldviews and different ways of thinking is a starting point. And I know it's hard because, you know, we're all human beings. And I teach a course in my graduate public health class, and can imagine with all of the changes that are taking place with public health, how we have conversations, and it's around how do we communicate these public health issues to different audiences. And it's one, developing empathy and fostering compassion, but at the same time recognizing that we're human beings and we have our own emotional realities. And noticing, you know, when something starts building up in you, and then being able to put a pause there to take a step back. So I don't know, I didn't have an answer for you. But the practices, the Peace and Justice Institute, their practices are really wonderful on how to go about just being able to engage different types of people. And I utilize that in my class too.
It's something that hasn't been addressed is that I see as a huge difference is the non-participation of the next generations in service organizations that used to be so vital in society.
I think, and this is just my opinion, I think our attention is being taken over by something else that's just a lot sexier. And has been specifically developed to really take our attention. And I think this is where, just referencing the pillar for digital environment reform, is we have to actively, we as society, as parents, as neighbors, those of us who are in constant contact with really young people, to put them in environments and in settings that can foster interaction with each other. So I think it's a confluence of factors that are coming into play, but I think a really big part of it is the social media and the phones that are taking a lot of their attention away.
This was a really great, macro. I'm curious about more like an individual level, as a person who is disabled and was sort of fully disconnected physically from the community for years, trying to get back in and finding things that are during the day for people who are not seniors. Like I've gone to lots of senior events and I'm just not welcome there. I know I fit socially, they just don't get it that I don't have children or grandchildren. So I'm just wondering if you have resources for individuals trying to, I guess, re-enter society.
So I would actually encourage the meetup platform that the Central Florida Freethought community utilizes for registration. And there's a lot of opportunities there also in being able to identify other informal, formal groups in being able to get back. So I would suggest, if you haven't yet, to start there. Oh, look at that.
Thank you so much.